Hello, and welcome to Historical Fiction with Kviatoslav. I enjoy discussing historical fiction written in the 20th century. And today, rather than a book review, I would like to discuss two types of historical fiction, basically two categories that I like to refer to as hard historical fiction and soft historical fiction. And in order to illustrate the difference between those, I've chosen one of my favorite authors, who goes by the name of Alfred Duggan. I'll do a review about some of his books in the future there, but he's definitely in my, would say, my holy trinity of favorite authors there. Um, and he wrote a number of books, and these two I thought might best illustrate the difference between hard historical fiction and soft historical fiction, because they're both basically about the same event, which is the First Crusade. This is the first book that Duggan wrote, which is called A Knight with Armor there, and this was actually the final book that he wrote before his death, which is called Count Bohemond. And I'll use them to illustrate the differences between hard and soft fiction. This book that I'll start with, Count Bohemond, concerns the First Crusade and actually follows the life of a lord called Bohemond of Taranto, who was a Norman lord from southern Italy, who joined in the First Crusade and was actually one of the leaders of the crusade, had many adventures, and eventually became the ruler of the Principality of Antioch, one of the kingdoms in the Holy Land after the success of the First Crusade. Now, this is considered hard fiction because Count Bohemond himself was an actual historical figure. We've got documentation of his life and many of the events that he did. So when you have hard historical fiction, that usually chooses this as the central character or protagonist, an actual historical personage, someone who actually existed in history. Whereas this book, which covers the same territory, the First Crusade, actually the main character in this book is a gentleman called Roger de Bohun, who was a simple knight, a Norman knight, who joined in the train of Robert Curthose, the Duke of Normandy, and he's actually a fictional character. So we actually see the life through a lore kind of knight there, but he didn't actually exist, which is why we would call that soft fiction. So the difference between hard and soft historical fiction, basically, hard fiction concerns a historical character as the main focus, and soft historical fiction features a fictional character, but one who actually could have existed in that era. And there are advantages and disadvantages to each. I would say with hard historical fiction, you've got an actual historical personage and you've got the actual events often to direct the writer. But I think for a writer, it actually can be difficult to try to inhabit an actual person's head there. They have to put themselves into the thoughts of a person who existed many centuries before, and they might have some difficulty sometimes even, say, justifying some of their actions. Whereas a soft historical, a fictional character, the writer is actually able to make the character their own and to uh, you know, invent the character's motivations themselves without having to try to put themselves into another character's place. However, sometimes writers might, often some of the worst historical fiction is soft because the writers will sometimes put a self-insert or their own character in, making the character less realistic. So I would say Alfred Duggan did a good job with each of the historical fictions. He even has written some which I would consider kind of semi-hard fictions there, like Conscience of the King here, which is actually written about Cerdic of Wessex, the first king of Wessex, who was an actual historical figure, but he was so obscure that we don't know anything about his life other than, his existence and his death. So I would actually categorize him as kind of a probably more of a soft character because he had to invent most of the details of his life. So basically that's the difference between hard and soft historical fiction. Both have their advantages and both have their drawbacks. Thank you.